Juliana dials 911 at 1:22 p.m. She stares at the 325-pound giant sitting quietly at the VIP table. There is a suspicious man here. Maybe a gang member, she whispers. Actually, Shaquille O'Neal just wants a quiet lunch after a stressful day on the stock market. He looks for a way to remember his poor Newark childhood through a simple meal, but the fancy restaurant rejects him. Strict dress codes, mean customers, and police sirens are all getting closer. Luckily, Naomi, a waitress with only $14.15 in her bank account, sees those kind eyes. Who will really be the one to leave in shame? The morning started with numbers on a screen. Red numbers. Falling numbers. Shaquille O'Neal sat alone in his home office at 9:15 a.m. His laptop showed a loss of $340,000 in one trade. He did not curse. He did not throw anything. He just closed the laptop and rubbed his eyes. His hands were huge, rough at the knuckles, but gentle when they touched anything small. Big Shaq had learned a long time ago that yelling never fixed a bad trade. Yelling only made the room smaller. He stood up slowly, careful not to bump his head on the ceiling fan again. It had happened 3 times this year. At 2 meters and 16 centimeters, doorways were never built for him. Chairs groaned under his weight before he even sat down. People thought his size gave him power everywhere he walked. They were wrong. His size gave him work. Every restaurant booth, every economy seat, every low ceiling. His body had to fold and fit into a world made for smaller men. Before leaving, he stood in the kitchen for a moment, staring at a small photo taped to the fridge. It showed a younger version of himself, skinny and tall, standing next to his mother outside their old apartment. Lucille wore a faded blue dress in that photo. She was smiling, even though the electric bill was overdue that week. He remembered that dress. He remembered counting exact change at the corner store, so she would not have to. He remembered promising himself, somewhere around age 12, that hunger would never again decide what his family ate. He remembered the exact taste of an empty stomach at school, pretending he simply was not hungry that day. That promise had built an empire. But some mornings, the empire felt very far away from the boy in that photo. He grabbed his truck keys off the counter and walked out, through the garage, past 3 cars he barely used. He climbed into his old Ford F-150, not the Rolls-Royce parked next to it. The truck felt like home. The leather seat was cracked in one corner. He liked it that way. New things did not comfort him. He drove without music, just the hum of the engine and his own thoughts. His mind drifted back to Newark, New Jersey, the way it always did when the numbers turned red. He remembered his mother, Lucille, stretching a $5 bill across 4 days of groceries. He remembered standing in line at a corner store, praying the cashier would not laugh at his height. He remembered being hungry, and how hunger taught him to notice other hungry people first. Now he had more money than he could count. But some nights, food still tasted like survival, not luxury. Today he wanted one specific thing. Cornbread. Real cornbread, the kind his mother used to make on Sunday mornings. He searched his phone for a place with a southern menu. One restaurant came up close to his neighborhood. The Velvet Key. 5 stars. 400 reviews. A photo of golden cornbread on the front page. He decided to go, not as a celebrity, not as a legend, just as a tired man who wanted lunch. He pulled his gray hoodie over his head before stepping out of the truck. He kept his eyes low. He walked slowly toward the entrance, folding his shoulders inward the way he always did in public spaces. The glass door was heavy. He pulled it open, with 2 fingers, careful not to rip the handle off. Cool air and soft piano music met him at the door. The lobby smelled like lemon polish and roses. Crystal chandeliers hung above the dining room, throwing small circles of light across white tablecloths. Every table had fresh flowers in a thin glass vase. Every napkin was folded into a sharp triangle. Servers moved quietly between tables, trained to disappear into the background, unless a guest needed something. It was the kind of place built for people who never had to check a price before ordering. Shaq had eaten in 100 restaurants like this one. Most nights, they felt lonelier than any Newark stoop. A young woman looked up from behind a marble podium. Her badge read Naomi. She was maybe 24 years old, with tired eyes and a name tag slightly crooked on her uniform. She smiled at him, a real smile, not the fake one restaurant workers use for big tippers. Table for one? She asked. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, like she expected him to say no. He nodded once. Somewhere quiet, if you got it, he said, keeping his voice low. Naomi walked him to a corner booth near the back, away from the windows. It was 1:05 p.m. He slid into the booth carefully. The table still rocked a little under his knee. Naomi placed a glass of water in front of him. Her hand trembled slightly as she set it down. He noticed. He always noticed small things like trembling hands, chipped nails, worn-out shoes. Years of being poor had trained his eyes to catch pain before anyone said a single word. Rough morning, he asked quietly, not looking directly at her, giving her room to lie if she wanted. Naomi glanced over her shoulder before answering. Something like that, she whispered, then walked away fast. Across the dining room, a woman in a tight, gray blazer watched Naomi with narrow eyes. Her name tag read, Juliana, manager. Juliana moved like she owned every square inch of the restaurant. Chin lifted, heels clicking hard on marble floor. She caught Naomi near the kitchen door and grabbed her wrist. You spilled sauce on table 6 linen, she hissed. It was 1 drop, Naomi whispered. I already wiped it. 1 drop costs us a 5-star review, Juliana snapped. You're already on thin ice this month. Naomi's eyes dropped to the floor. She said nothing. Arguing back never worked with Juliana. Shaq watched all of this, from his booth, though he pretended to study the menu instead. He saw the shame flash across Naomi's face. He recognized that look. His mother wore it during hard months. A memory surfaced from Newark. A landlord screaming at his mother over 3 days of late rent. Little Shaquille, only 9 years old back then, standing in the doorway, fists clenched, powerless to help her. He had promised himself something that day. If he ever had power, he would use it quietly, but firmly. He looked back down at the menu. Cornbread, $8.99, a small price for a memory worth more than money. At 1:15 p.m., Naomi returned to take his order, her hands steadier now, her smile forced back into place. I'll have the cornbread, he said. And the collard greens, if they're good. They're the best in the city, Naomi said, a small real laugh slipping out for a second. My grandma used to make greens like that, Shaq said softly. Haven't had any this good since. Naomi's eyes softened. For a moment, she forgot to be afraid of Juliana watching from across the room. I'll make sure the kitchen does it right, she said, and walked off with his order. Juliana appeared at his table 2 minutes later, arms crossed, blazer buttoned all the way to her neck. Sir, I need to check something, she said, voice sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. This is a 5-star establishment. Shaq lifted his eyes slowly. I'm aware, he said. I read the menu. Our clientele expects a certain presentation, Juliana continued, eyes scanning his hoodie and worn sneakers. He said nothing. He simply folded his hands on the table and waited for her to finish her thought. I'm going to need you to consider our dress code policy, she said, sliding a small laminated card toward him. He glanced at the card without touching it. Says here, no swimwear, no bare feet, he said calmly. I got neither. Juliana's jaw tightened. It's more about overall image, she said, choosing her words like a lawyer. My money's the same color as everybody else's, Shaq said, voice still low, still even. I'll wait for my food. Juliana's cheeks flushed red. She turned and walked away, heels striking the floor harder than before. She stopped near the kitchen door, pulled out her phone, and typed a quick message to another manager. We have a situation at table 12, she wrote. Big guy, hoodie, refusing to follow dress code. The other manager replied fast. Handle it your way. You know the owners trust your judgment. That message gave Juliana confidence she had not earned. She tucked the phone away and smoothed her blazer again. She glanced toward Mrs. Gable's table, already planning her next move like a chess player circling a trapped king. In her mind, this was simple. A man who did not belong needed to be removed before he caused real trouble. She had built her whole career on decisions like this, quick judgments made from a glance and nothing more. Nobody had ever taught her to look twice before deciding who deserved respect and who did not. At a nearby table, an older woman in pearls leaned toward her husband, whispering loud enough for others to hear. "That man makes me uncomfortable," she said, glancing at Shaq like he was a stray animal. Someone should say something. Her name, though nobody used it out loud, was Mrs. Gable, a regular who tipped well and complained often. Mrs. Gable came to the Velvet Key every Tuesday, always at the same table, always ordering the same salmon. She liked the restaurant because it made her feel important, surrounded by white tablecloths and quiet, careful service. A big stranger in a hoodie disrupted that feeling, though she could not really explain why in any honest way. She simply decided he did not belong, the same way she decided things about people her whole life. Her husband, a quiet man, who rarely spoke in public, said nothing and kept eating his soup. He had learned decades ago that arguing with his wife in public never ended well for anyone nearby. Juliana overheard her and saw an opportunity. She walked straight to Mrs. Gable's table, nodding sympathetically. "I completely understand your concern," Juliana said. "I'm handling it right now." She turned back toward Shaq's table, chin high, already rehearsing her next move in her mind. Naomi arrived at that exact moment, with his food, cornbread steaming, greens glistening with a little pork fat. "Here you go," she said, setting the plate down with careful hands. "Careful, the plate's hot." Shaq broke off a piece of cornbread and took a small bite. His eyes closed for a second. It tasted almost like Lucille's kitchen, almost like Newark on a Sunday morning, before the bills came due. "This is good," he said quietly. "Real good." Naomi smiled, genuinely this time. "I'm glad," she said. "Enjoy it. I'll check on you soon." She lingered for one more second. "Don't worry about her," she whispered, nodding slightly toward Juliana. "Nobody will bother you here." It was a small sentence, but it landed heavy in Shaq's chest, like a gift nobody else would understand. He nodded once, a silent thank you, and let her walk away, before continuing his meal in peace. But peace never lasted long in rooms ruled by people like Juliana. At 1:22 p.m., Juliana stood near the host's stand, phone pressed to her ear, voice hushed and urgent. 911, "What's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. "There's a suspicious man in my restaurant," Juliana whispered, glancing sideways at Shaq's table. "He might be dangerous. Maybe a gang member." The dispatcher asked for details. Juliana gave a description built entirely on fear, not fact. "He's huge. Over 300 pounds. Wearing a hoodie, refusing to leave, making my other guests scared," she said. None of it was fully true, but every word sounded convincing enough to send officers rushing over. She hung up and smoothed her blazer, satisfied, like she had just solved a problem instead of creating one. Shaq, seated 20 feet away, could not hear every word, but he saw her body language. He understood. He had seen this exact scene before, in different cities, with different names, but always the same fear-driven script. He did not panic. He did not raise his voice. He picked up his phone and typed one message. The message went to Theodore Banks, the regional director who managed several commercial properties, including this very building. "Come to the Velvet Key now. Bring the lease documents," he typed, thumb steady, face calm. He pressed send, set the phone face down, and picked his fork back up like nothing had happened. Theodore replied within seconds. "On my way. 10 minutes out. Everything okay?" Shaq typed back one short line. "Just watch and learn when you get here." He did not feel angry. Anger burned energy he had learned to save for things that actually mattered. Instead, he felt a strange calm, the same calm he used to feel walking into a packed arena as a kid. Back then, he always pretended he was not nervous, even with his heart pounding hard. Back then, the fear was about missing a shot. Today, the fear belonged to someone else entirely. He glanced around the dining room, noticing how nobody else seemed to know what was coming. Forks clinked. Waiters refilled wine glasses. Somewhere near the kitchen, a chef laughed at his own joke. Normal life continued, unaware that a storm was quietly gathering near table 12. Naomi passed by again, refilling his water. She noticed the tension building near the front of the restaurant. "Everything okay?" she asked quietly, sensing something was wrong even without knowing the details yet. "It will be," Shaq said, and for the first time, a small, tired smile crossed his face. Minutes passed slowly. The restaurant buzzed, with normal chatter, forks against plates, low laughter, clinking glasses. Then, at 1:34 p.m., red and blue lights flashed through the front windows, painting the walls in warning colors. Two police officers walked in, one older, one younger, both scanning the room with practiced caution. The older officer, Silas Grant, had worked this neighborhood for 11 years. He liked things simple and quiet. Juliana rushed toward them immediately, pointing dramatically at Shaq's corner booth. "That's him. Right there." Every head in the restaurant turned. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. Mrs. Gable clutched her pearls, pretending to be frightened, though her eyes gleamed with excitement instead. Officer Silas approached the table slowly, one hand resting near his belt, the other raised in a calm gesture. "Sir, I need you to stand up slowly," he said, voice steady, trained for moments exactly like this. Shaq set down his fork gently. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, unhurried, unafraid. Then he stood. All 2 meters and 16 centimeters of him rose from the booth, filling the space like a wall. Officer Silas froze for half a second. Something in his memory clicked into place. He had watched this man play basketball as a kid. He had worn his jersey number growing up. He remembered watching playoff games with his father, both of them shouting at the television whenever Shaq scored. 11 years on patrol had taught Silas to read a room fast, and this room did not add up. A dangerous man does not sit quietly eating cornbread. A dangerous man does not fold his napkin twice. Everything about this call felt wrong, but procedure meant he still had to ask his questions properly. "You're Shaq," Silas said quietly, disbelief washing over his face like cold water. Shaq gave a small nod. "That's what they call me," he said. "Right now, I'm just a man eating lunch." Juliana's confidence cracked slightly, but she pushed forward anyway, unwilling to admit her mistake in front of everyone. "He's the one causing the disturbance," she insisted, voice rising in pitch. "I want him removed immediately." Silas glanced between Juliana and the calm giant standing quietly in front of him, confusion spreading across his face. "Ma'am, what exactly did he do?" Silas asked, lowering his hand from his belt entirely now. He refused to leave when I asked," Juliana said, though nobody had actually heard her ask him to leave. Naomi, standing nearby with a tray in her hands, opened her mouth, then closed it, afraid to speak up. She had seen everything. She knew Shaq never once raised his voice or refused a reasonable request. But speaking against Juliana meant risking her job, and her job meant everything to her right now. At home, her bank account held exactly $14.15. Rent was due in 6 days. She could not afford to lose this. Still, watching an innocent man get accused because of fear and prejudice made her stomach twist painfully. Before she could decide what to do, the front door opened again, chime ringing softly above it. Theodore Banks walked in, wearing a sharp navy suit, carrying a thin leather folder under one arm. He scanned the room quickly, spotted Shaq, and walked straight past Juliana, without even glancing at her. "Mr. O'Neill," Theodore said, extending a respectful hand. "I got here as fast as I could." Juliana's face went pale. You know him?" she asked, voice suddenly small and uncertain. Theodore turned to her, expression polite but cold. "Everyone in this building should know him," he said simply. Theodore had known Shaq for almost a decade, ever since managing the very first property purchase in this city. He had never once seen his boss raise his voice, even during far more difficult business disputes than this. Whatever was happening here, Theodore trusted it completely, though the tension in the room clearly worried him. He opened the leather folder and pulled out a document, holding it up for Officer Silas to see clearly. "This building and 40% of this restaurant's parent company belongs to Mr. O'Neill," Theodore said calmly. The room went completely silent. Even the piano music playing softly in the background seemed to fade away. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Somewhere behind the bar, a glass clinked once, then went quiet too. Every guest in the restaurant suddenly remembered exactly why this man had looked familiar the moment he walked in. Phones came out quietly under tables, guests trying to snap a photo, without seeming too obvious about it. Naomi stood near the kitchen doorway, hand pressed against her chest, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. She thought back to the small kindness she had offered him earlier, never once imagining who she was really talking to. It did not change how she felt about him. If anything, it made his gentleness feel even larger somehow. Mrs. Gable's hand flew to her chest. Her earlier performance of fear now looked embarrassingly foolish. Juliana's mouth opened, but no words came out at first. Her heels no longer felt so powerful beneath her. That's not possible, she finally stammered. He's just sitting here in a hoodie, eating alone. Rich men don't always dress like your imagination expects, Shaq said quietly, sitting back down in his booth. Officer Silas stepped back, holstering the radio he had been holding, clearly done with this entire situation. There's no crime here, he said to Juliana, tone firm. You called us over nothing but appearances. Juliana tried one more defense. I was protecting the restaurant's standards, she said, voice shaking now. Shaq looked up at her, calm but unmistakably serious. You weren't protecting standards, he said. You were killing the soul of this place. His voice never rose above a normal speaking volume, yet somehow it silenced the entire dining room instantly. Theodore stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, though everyone nearby could still hear every word clearly. Mr. O'Neill asked me to review payroll before coming today, Theodore said, opening a second document from his folder. He scanned it quickly, eyebrows furrowing. Naomi Carter has 3 unexplained deductions this month, he said. Naomi's eyes widened. She had noticed the missing money on her paycheck, but was too afraid to question it. Those were performance corrections, Juliana said quickly, though her voice cracked slightly on the last word. For what performance issue? Theodore asked, flipping through the pages. I see notes about a spilled sauce and a broken glass. Rules are rules, Juliana said weakly, grasping at anything that might rebuild her authority in this moment. Shaq stood again, slower this time, letting his full presence settle over the room like quiet thunder. Rules protect people, he said, not punish them for being human. He thought about Naomi's trembling hands earlier and how fear-like that never came from nowhere. He thought about every manager who had ever made a hard-working person feel small over a spilled drop of sauce. This was not really about cornbread or dress codes, or even about him sitting quietly in a corner booth. This was about a system that let people like Juliana feel powerful only by stepping on people like Naomi. He turned to Theodore. Let her go, he said simply. Now, while the officers are still here as witnesses. Terminate her employment for cause, Shaq added. Document everything. Make sure this never happens to anyone else here. Theodore nodded immediately, already reaching for his phone to process the termination through proper channels. Juliana's face crumbled. The woman who had ordered a hero arrested was now being fired in front of him. You can't do this, she whispered, though her voice had lost all its earlier sharpness and confidence. I'm not doing anything, Shaq said gently. You did this. I'm just making sure the truth catches up. Officer Silas, watching quietly, stepped forward one last time. Ma'am, I'd suggest you gather your things, he said. Juliana looked around the restaurant, searching for support, but every face reflected quiet judgment instead of sympathy. Even Mrs. Gable looked away, suddenly very interested in the tablecloth in front of her. Slowly, without another word, Juliana untied her apron and unclipped her manager badge, letting both fall onto the podium. She walked toward the exit, heels no longer clicking, with confidence, just soft and hollow against the marble floor. The glass door closed behind her quietly, a small sound compared to the noise she had caused earlier. Naomi stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, tray still balanced on one hand, eyes wide with disbelief. Shaq turned toward her, his expression softening completely for the first time since he had walked in. Come here for a second, he said gently, patting the empty seat across from him at the booth. Naomi hesitated, glancing at Theodore, who nodded encouragingly, before she finally set her tray down and sat. You didn't have to speak up for me, Shaq said. But you did, in your own quiet way. I just told you the truth, Naomi said softly, that nobody would bother you here. I guess I was wrong. No, Shaq said, shaking his head slowly. You were right. It just took the truth a little longer to arrive. He pulled a pen from his hoodie pocket and grabbed a blank receipt from the table. He wrote a number down carefully, then slid the paper across the table toward her. Naomi looked down and gasped softly. The number read $25,000. I can't accept this, she said immediately, pushing the paper back toward him. This is too much. It's not a tip, Shaq said calmly. It's enough so you never have to be scared of someone like her again. Naomi's eyes filled. With tears she tried hard to blink away, and used to kindness this large or sudden. Pay off whatever's weighing on you, Shaq continued. Rent, bills, school, if you're chasing something bigger. I'm trying to finish my nursing degree, Naomi admitted quietly. I had to pause it last semester. What happened? Shaq asked, his voice gentle, giving her space to answer only if she wanted. My mom got sick, Naomi said. I picked up extra shifts here instead of paying tuition. She doing better now? He asked, leaning forward slightly, genuine concern replacing the earlier tension in his face. She is, Naomi said, a small smile breaking through. Slowly, but she's doing better. Good, Shaq said. Family comes first. Always. Everything else can wait a little while. It hasn't been easy, Naomi admitted. Some nights I barely make rent, after paying her medical bills. You're still here, still showing up every shift, still smiling at strangers, Shaq said. That counts for something. Naomi nodded, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye with the back of her hand. I used to think asking for help meant I failed somehow, she admitted. My mom raised me to never depend on anyone. My mother raised me the same way, Shaq said. Took me years to learn that help isn't weakness. It's just people reaching back for each other, he added. Nothing more complicated than that. Then unpause it, Shaq said simply. Newark taught me one thing. Nobody climbs alone. Somebody always reaches back. My mother worked 2 jobs just to keep lights on, he added. A neighbor once paid our light bill without asking. I never forgot that. Not the amount, not the neighbor's face, not the relief on my mother's shoulders that night. Theodore, still standing nearby, cleared his throat gently. Mr. O'Neill, would you like me to draft new management terms? Shaq nodded. Someone who treats waitresses and customers with the same respect, he said. That's the only requirement. Officer Silas, preparing to leave, paused at the door and looked back one more time. Mr. O'Neill, he said, for what it's worth, I'm sorry we responded to a call like that. You did your job, Shaq said. It's the call that was wrong, not the men who answered it. Silas nodded respectfully and walked out, radio crackling softly, as he returned to his patrol car outside. The restaurant slowly returned to normal, conversations resuming in soft, embarrassed whispers around the room. Mrs. Gable quietly asked for her check early, avoiding eye contact with anyone as she gathered her purse. Shaq finished the last bite of his cornbread, savoring the taste of home one more time, before pushing the plate away. He stood up fully, no longer needing to hide beneath his hoodie or shrink into the corner booth. Naomi walked him to the door, still holding the receipt, with the number that would change her life. Thank you, she said again, voice thick with emotion. Not just for the money, for seeing me at all. I know what it's like being invisible, Shaq said. Even at this size, people used to look right through me. He pushed the heavy glass door open, with one hand, sunlight spilling across the sidewalk outside. Take care of yourself, he said, and finish that degree. The world needs more people who notice small things. I will, Naomi said. I promise. And thank you, Shaq, for everything. Just Shaq, he said, smiling. No, mister. Not with you. Naomi laughed softly, wiping her eyes one last time, before heading back inside to finish her shift. Naomi nodded, tears finally slipping down her cheeks, though this time they were tears of relief, not fear. Shaq walked back to his old Ford F-150, climbing in slowly, careful with the low doorframe once again. He started the engine, glancing once more at the velvet key through his rearview mirror. The restaurant looked the same from the outside, but inside, something important had shifted permanently. He thought about how easily the whole afternoon could have gone differently if Naomi had stayed silent like everyone else. One small kindness, one soft sentence at the right moment, had changed the direction of an entire life. He wondered how many other Naomis existed in the world quietly kind, quietly struggling, quietly overlooked by everyone around them. He could not save every one of them, but he could stop pretending he did not notice when one crossed his path. That, he decided, was the real lesson Newark had taught him, better than any arena or contract ever could. He pulled out onto the busy street, blending into the noise and motion of the city around him. Nobody watching him drive away would guess that a legend had just quietly rewritten someone's entire future. He stopped at a red light 2 blocks from the restaurant, drumming his fingers gently on the steering wheel. A group of kids crossed the street in front of him, laughing loudly about something only they understood. One of them, a tall, skinny boy, reminded him instantly of himself at that same awkward age. He wondered if that boy had a mother like Lucille, stretching every dollar further than it should reasonably go. He wondered if somebody would notice that boy someday, the way Naomi had noticed him this afternoon. The light turned green. He eased his foot onto the gas and kept driving, the city humming around him. Back inside, Naomi tucked the receipt into her apron pocket, pressing her hand against it like a promise. She thought about her bank account, sitting at $14.15 that morning, feeling impossibly far away now. She thought about her nursing books, still stacked on her nightstand, waiting to be opened again. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future that felt steady, not desperate. She thought about her small apartment above a laundromat, the one with a leaking faucet she never had money to fix. She thought about her little brother, still in high school, asking her last week if she was okay. She had lied and said yes, the way tired people always do when the truth feels too heavy to share. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, that lie might finally start becoming true. She pulled out her phone and typed a short message to her brother. "Things are about to get better." He replied almost instantly, with a single question mark, confused but hopeful, the way little brothers always are. She smiled, tucked her phone away, and went back to work, lighter than she had felt in months. Theodore approached her with a clipboard, offering a temporary management role while corporate reviewed permanent candidates. "Mr. O'Neill specifically mentioned your name," Theodore said. "He said you understand what this place should feel like." Naomi smiled, through her tears, nodding slowly, still holding on to that small, powerful piece of paper. Outside, the city moved on the way it always did, loud, busy, indifferent to the quiet miracle that just happened. But somewhere on a quiet street, a big man drove home in an old truck, feeling lighter than before. He had not raised his voice once. He had not thrown his name around like a weapon. He had simply waited, watched, and let the truth arrive exactly when it needed to. Power, real power, never needed to shout. Sometimes it just needed a quiet table, a plate of cornbread, and one waitress brave enough to say a kind word first. And somewhere in Newark, if Lucille could have seen her son that afternoon, she would have smiled too. Not because he was rich, not because he was famous, because he still knew how to fold himself small enough to fit into a world that never quite fit him. Because he still remembered every hungry night, every cracked chair, every landlord who screamed over a few dollars. And because, even now, with more money than he could ever spend, he still noticed the quiet ones first. That, more than any trophy or contract, was the inheritance Lucille had truly given her son. Somewhere across the city, Naomi tied her apron back on, ready to finish her shift with a lighter heart. Tomorrow, she would call her college advisor. Tomorrow, the fear that lived in her chest would finally start to shrink. Tonight, though, she simply smiled at every table she served, carrying a secret nobody else could see. The velvet key stayed open until closing time, quiet and steady, the way a good restaurant should feel. And somewhere out in traffic, an old Ford F-150 disappeared into the evening, carrying a man who needed nothing back in return.